fine, you'll be keen to hear Jack's tips on planting and trimming. Also on tonight's show, Rud finally finds a use for the dreaded wild ginger when he checks out the IHC Cottage paper mill in Whangarei. Maggie visits Pukemarama. It's a grand garden of old, brought back to life in the Manawatu. And Mark Leishman reports on the efforts of a Kerry woman to save the Kiwi in her own backyard. First up, though, they come as decks, half decks, cactus and water lilies. It's quite confusing, really, but not to the dahlia lover. They're just some of the various types of dahlia. And one of the biggest collections in the country can be found in the Bay of Plenty township of Te Puke. It belongs to Peter Burl, and he's turned a vacant section next to his house into a colourful wonderland. Our Bill ventured in search of the man. The flowers just couldn't be missed.
Well, Peter, I finally found you.
Good morning, Bill.
It's like the day of the Triffids here.
Well, yes, nice and tall. What are you, 6'2"? These are 7 feet.
How do you do it?
Well, these have had virtually nothing, Bill. Nothing, hardly any manure. But the secret of these is good stock.
So what initiated you in sort of expanding to the degree that you have?
Well, I love doing show work, and I love keeping up with the new ones. So, you know, you've got to be ahead of the Joneses. And this is why we keep expanding. But, you know, I get a lot of help from a lot of friends. It's just a hobby.
What are your favourites?
Oh, they're all favourites. They've all got their own character. And, you know, we love breeding our own. We've got new ones coming on stream. We've got one in England now and there's 3 more going this year. And, you know, it's a colour range. We look for something in the classified division which is a different colour.
Well, how about showing me some of the ones that you're particularly proud of? Cacti one here looks a bit like burning embers.
Yes, Bill, it's bred from Jessica. It's a full cactus, and as you can see, it's got beautiful colouring.
What about this lavender one here?
The lavender one, Bill, it's going in. It's got huge potential overseas, and next year, look out New Zealand.
Why? You're going to win the champion of champions with it, you think?
Well, it's got such a strong stem that it holds up in the weather, and it's got very good form, exceptionally good form, and we've called that Kotari Irene.
So has that not been released yet, then?
Hasn't been released yet. We're keeping it under wraps this year.
Let's have a look at this. Oh, that is stunning.
It's
absolutely stunning.
It's interesting, Bill, because on each petal it's got a little wee white tip to it.
Mm.
And as you can see, the rows of 4 rows of petals are even right round.
Oh, yeah.
And at the back of it, as you look underneath, you can see it's gone right to the very back.
Well, it's not good night, Irene, is it? It's going to be good day, Irene.
Good day. But it's got a marvellous form. I'm very selective in the seedling, and it's got a very good size. It comes up to size very easily, too.
Well, this one looks a bit like dawn breaking. It's a really large flower.
Yes, Bill, it's Levon Splinter. It's the oldest giant semi-cactus we've got showing still. It's got a very good colour. It has got a slight tendency to have a weak stem, but it's got very good form, and it's been around a long while now. And from the giant semi-cactus, we go over here to the giant deck.
Oh. Yeah.
And these here, this is a cream. It was bred in England, and it's a giant decorative. It's doing extremely well over here.
And the name of this one?
Is Elvis Supreme.
And how large do they get?
Oh, it goes a little bit bigger than that, Bill. But, you know, it's very good form. I'd pick that for a giant deck anywhere. Lovely
Creamy yellow colouring through, even with the sun sitting in behind there.
Yeah, it's a more of a lemon, I think, Bill, than a yellow.
And what have we got over here?
This is one of our own, which we're rather thrilled about. It's going to be called Kotari Buttermilk. It's a large deck, and it's going into England this year. And it's going to be registered for a cup in England. We don't know how it's going to do, but it's the only colour we've got within the large deck range, and we're rather pleased with it. It's 3 years old, and it's very prolific.
So where did the name Kotari come from?
Well, Kotari is recognised now worldwide. We had to have a prefix. If we're going to put flowers overseas, we're going to have a prefix. So we like the word Kotari because I love catching kingfish, and Kotari is the Māori word for kingfisher.
Now, if I was picking dahlias, what sort of life can I expect in a vase?
All right, now in picking dahlias, it's important is to get a bucket of water and cut your flower off, just like that. Now in here, the stem is hollow. All right, make a hole underwater and get the air out. You don't need to burn them, just make a hole underwater and get the air out. And then I use a solution of chlorogene, a teaspoon to a litre, and sugar, teaspoon to a litre, and do it that way.
And so the lifespan is what?
The lifespan can be extended for 4 or 5 days. Change it every second day, and there it is.
So dahlias are more than just a garden plant, they're actually an inside pleasure as well.
Oh yes, you know, there's a lot of floral artists using dahlias now. And I've got the barberry strains, and they're always looking for this because they've got nice strong stems and a full range of colour.
Well, this is an interesting area you've got here, Peter.
Yes, Bill, this is a small quarantine area. This variety here is Creve Coeur. It's been around for 2 years now. It's a giant semi-cactus.
Pretty brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant colour. It's growing in the wrong place. It's right up to the ceiling here. And then over here we've got a new one, which is Madeleine Anne.
Interesting gold.
An interesting gold. Yeah, it'll be a giant decorative. That's the first bud of it. That's the first bud in New Zealand.
And these other two?
Well, these are 2 miniature balls, and to me, these have got real potential. This is Hamari Rose. It's bred by the man that bred Hamari Accord. Beautiful colouring. A lovely little pink one, really. And it's a true miniature ball with the flower, the petals are involute. Very nice and round.
Oh, magnificent red.
Yeah, this is the pick of them all. This is Cornell, and I've read a lot about this from overseas. A beautiful miniature ball, and I'd love that, about 20 plants of that, because look out for this next year.
Oh, yeah. Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day, yes, the true red.
Well, that's very, very stunning.
Oh, there's beautiful stems, the thickness of the stem.
I bet the rose growers in New Zealand like stems like that.
Oh, they sure do, Bill, they sure do. I love importing the new ones and breeding my own. You know, there it is. Breeding your own, getting something good, getting something in from overseas. See the new colours as we've seen today. There's so many shapes in dahlias. You know, you've got your big giants from 22 inches, which I've grown this year, right down to little wee pom-poms, which are about 1.5 inches. And there we have it. It's a lovely flower to grow, Bill.
What a glorious collection, wasn't it? Coming up after the break, Jack shows us how to plant a box hedge, and Rud watches weeds turn into beautiful writing paper at the IHC Cottage paper mill in Whangarei. This week's Viewer's Garden prize is Glorious Gardens. It's a portfolio of ideas for planting and design. Majestic trees and vivid flower beds combine to produce stunning results in Richard and Bridget Preston's large Christchurch garden. Both the walnut and the flowering cherry trees are over 70 years old.
Hedge is, of course, the box. The English box, as we often refer to it. And this hedge that I'm standing by here at the Auckland Regional Botanic Gardens, we planted getting on for 15 years ago, and as you can see, it's about 90 centimetres tall. Would have been an awful lot taller if we hadn't clipped it a couple of times a year. But as you can see, it's a magnificent hedge. It's very dense, it's very long-lived, disease-resistant. Basically, those are the sorts of reasons why it has become so incredibly popular. Now, when it comes to planting a box, what to do? Well, not too much different from any other hedge that we might plant. A weed-free soil is important, good drainage, and those are the main requirements. Now, what I'm going to plant here are some plants of edging box. That's the little box, the one that stays very, very small. It's Buxus sempervirens safruticosa. And this just is an ideal plant for a demarcation between a garden and another area, or for wherever you want something that's a neat defining mark between two different spaces. But it hasn't got much vigour, and simply take the plant out of your container, tease those roots out like that, and put your plant into the soil and then backfill. Very simple process. And the spacing between fruticosa plants should be, say, around about 15 centimetres. That's only 6 inches, so very, very close together, and it means you need a lot of plants. Once again, teasing out the roots, 15 centimetres away from the first plant, digging my hole, putting the plant in, and backfilling. You'll notice I put a string line out so that I get a nice straight hedge, and it's a very quick, simple way of making sure that you do achieve a nice straight line. And there we are, they're planted very close together, as you can see. This other hedge, this sempervirens, we planted that at 60 centimetre spacings, but it took ages to meet up. My advice would be go about 45 centimetres apart with this. Now, of course, you do need a lot of plants for a box hedge, and the cheap way is to propagate your own. And there's a few ways of doing that. Now, the first way is by layering, and I'm going to layer this little shoot on the side of this box plant here. First of all, I'm just taking a slither of bark off the side of that shoot at the base, and that wound is where the roots will emerge. I'm then going to pin that shoot down into the soil, just using a piece of wire that I've bent in half, and I'm pushing it right into the soil so that it's buried at that point. What you could do, if you like, is just put a rock over the top. Very simple. And then another rock like that is going to prop the cutting more or less upright. Well, not the cutting, the layered thing. It's basically a cutting that's still attached to the mother plant. Now, other ways of doing cuttings of box. Well, first of all, you can do them in pots. Take a pot of sand or a well-drained potting mix, and take a small cutting like this one here off the end, off the tip of the shoot, just like that. Take the leaves off the lower third of the cutting. If you like, you can dip it into hormone, but I don't think it's really necessary. And push it into your sand, and you can see there that the cutting is done. It's very quick, it's very simple, and it's very cheap. And then, of course, a plastic bag to create that instant greenhouse. And there you go. That's going to keep the humidity in and stop our cuttings from wilting. I have some cuttings here that I did just a couple of months ago, and all of them have made roots. And look at that, for a good root system in just a couple of months from taking the cutting. Now, if you think mucking around with doing your cuttings in pots is too much hassle, too fussy, then you can do them straight in to the ground. Just if you've got a heavy soil, open up a slit in the soil like that, put a bit of sand into the slit, and then you can put cuttings all along that slit. You can take big cuttings like this one here. That's probably 17 or 18 centimetres long, and take the foliage at least off a third, maybe even up to a half, push it into the ground. Try to find a slightly shaded location, and you can do heaps of those. Leave them in the garden, maybe the veggie garden, until this time next year. You can dig them up, you've got a free hedge.
Horrible weeds. They have this habit of reappearing in your garden all the time. Whereas this looks to me like a love letter, written in moments of passion on handcrafted paper, scented with roses and lavender, and a touch of this. Oh, yes, it's true. Here in Whangarei, there's a paper production line with a difference. At the IHC Cottage paper mill, almost anything is thrown into the mix to create interesting textures and styles in the paper being produced. But Rhonda, this is not the only interesting aspect of the paper mill, is it?
No, this was actually set up for people with intellectual disabilities, and out of that has come people who have a high self-esteem. They've loved the gentle way of teaching, even though we've set high goals. It's been based on bringing out their creativity and their inner beauty.
I noticed you're all wearing costumes. Is that part of the scene?
I think the 18th century thing fits in with the theme of the mill, a traditional 18th century cottage, a working garden that complements the mill, and the papermakers in standard costume. We thought that was part of setting a very upmarket little picture.
And the upmarket picture has now developed into a tourist attraction where visitors are invited to view the papermakers at work and then make paper of their own. School groups are also regular visitors. They create their own works as part of an education kit in recycling and paper making.
We used recycled paper, we can use rag, we can cut up hospital gowns and make linen papers. We can now make fibre papers out of noxious weeds.
Now, I'm very good at growing weeds, and one of the things that I used to grow in Northland was onion weed. Any uses for that?
Onion, yes, most plants we can either hammer down, cook down, and then put in our paper. They don't all make fibre paper because some of them are too soft, but those ingredients would add a lot of texture and interest to the paper. We focus mainly on the wild ginger. The flower heads are used for decoration and interest in envelopes. The stems are used for making our packaging, and we are naturally fermenting, so we're going to have a compost made from noxious weeds as well. So we're using the whole plant except for the big root system underneath.
So it's the sturdy, fibrous materials, the ones with a bit of guts to them, not that wishy-washy lettuce leaves.
No, that'll just give you a little wishy-washy look as well.
Yeah.
But that's part of paper making, is you need to get in there and experiment and just make it happen. That's part of the joy.
Now, I know I can't grow weeds, so it must follow that I can make paper. I joined in the bustling activity to see if I too had a creative streak in me. And with Diane as my tutor, I didn't do too badly. Hey, not bad. Here's our tray with the props, with all the weeds and plant material that we need to decorate our pieces of paper. Now, I'm going to make the wetter, and you are going to make some flowers. Here's my wetter head. And my wetter legs are attached to the body like this. And I have two wonderful wetter antennae. And I need something for my wetter to walk on, so I'm going to get some of this green foliage from the ginger plant again. Sometimes even for me the words may not come easy, but I hope she's going to be impressed by my handmade paper, made with a loving touch.
Isn't he a charmer? I'm not sure, though, if the wetter design was exactly the thing for a love letter, Rud. After the break, Maggie visits Pukemarama, a grand garden of old, brought back to life by Sue and Ian McKelvey. Brian and Nolene Fraser of Te Puke dug up their lawn to create a series of fish ponds. And after just 6 months, this much-admired feature looks as though it's always been there. This historic Manawatu homestead and garden, named Pukemarama, has been in the McKelvey family for over 100 years. The house is set on a steep north-facing ridge that looks out over the Rangatike farmlands. It's an imposing site with its brick terracing and formal English-style garden. was purchased in 1855 by John McKelvey and inherited by his son James, who designed the house and garden. Maggie spoke to great-grandson Ian and his wife Sue, who now live on the property with their 3 children.
Well, Maggie, my family came to live here in 1870. They built this house at the turn of the century, developed the garden from there on. My first memories of coming here were as a child of riding my bike around those concrete paths. We're the 4th generation of McKelvey to live here, and we really enjoy living here.
When we came here to live 13 years ago, our 3 children were quite young, so I was very involved bringing them up. But gradually, after I'd finished some renovating in the house, I decided to get involved with the garden and have brought it back to life, and this is what it is like today.
What a great gate.
Yes, Maggie, this is the gateway to our garden. This is where everybody comes through when they come visiting. And I wanted to preserve it and clear all the branches of the trees away. They were coming over and you could not get the view or the vista coming through. So we decided to lop off a few of these branches and just tidy it up a bit so that we could get the view coming through to the house.
Must have been a great advantage having this backdrop of mature trees.
Yes, the trees are very beautiful and majestic, and we have the very old box hedge going around. But coming through this area here, there were camellias, and so I wanted to have them cut down and have lower growing plants so that the eye could continue through, and to have a lot of colour.
You're keen on the colour?
Yes. Yes, I wanted to keep it hot, running through the central part of the garden.
When was the hard landscaping and the design of the garden laid out?
In the 1930s. Ian's grandfather was influenced by his trips over in European countries and came back and put everything into practice. The layout of the pathways and the brickwork that you see going on up through to the top of the steps.
And the structures around the garden, the little pergolas and this wonderful summer house.
Yes, that is. It's a delight in the middle of summer when it's very hot. It's always cool in there.
Looks great with Dublin Bay Rose over it.
Yes, it does. I felt like it needed a bit of a lift just over in that area.
And this pergola here, was there always a structure in this part of the garden?
Yes, there always has been. This is the 3rd one. The last 2 have disintegrated, and 5 years ago, my husband, who's a bit of a handyman, decided that the family could stay at home and build one of these instead of going on holiday. The only way to keep the possums off the garden is with this hot wire. We turn it on at night and we turn it off in the morning.
And if you didn't have the wire, what would happen?
Well, we'd have no roses.
They'd eat the lot,
Yes,
would
they would.
Aren't they rotten?
Yes.
Is the soil good here? You've certainly got great compost.
This is pure sand. We live on a sand hill, and so to build it up, we use animal manures from off the farm and sawdust leaves from out of the garden.
It must be useful having the irrigation through here. Is water a problem in this garden? It's because it's a large garden.
When we came here, we had no water in the garden, so slowly every year we put more irrigation throughout, and we're just about on top now. In the 1930s, and certainly when we came to live here, the terraces were rather bare and formal looking. I wanted to change that, so we removed the lawns and we put in a lot of plants, and what came up and looked the prettiest was survival of the prettiest.
That verbena makes a very good ground cover, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It flowers for a long season, beginning at early summer and still flowering at the end of winter.
Hard to keep under control?
No, it's not. We trim it back in the middle of the season and then trim it back by 2/3 at the end.
I do like that Sweet William. Adds a good bit of height and colour at the back there.
Yes, it's just gorgeous. We do let it seed down and it comes back up again each season.
Even the bud looks good, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, it does.
That Nicotiana's a very good plant too. Quite an old-fashioned one you don't see as much of as perhaps we could.
Yes, especially the white one. When we come down the steps at night, the perfume just wafting through the air, it's delicious.
So what was this part of the garden like when you moved here?
Well, this part was just an absolute jungle. There was weeds and old trees and all sorts lying right throughout this area. I guess we'd have cut down nearly half of these trees when we started to tidy up the old man's beard and stuff, because that was growing up. Almost every tree in the garden had it growing up in this area of the garden, and what we now call the dell. But we carted it all out into this open area, and we burnt it there and then carted the truckloads of stuff off to the teeny dump. There was just heaps of it.
And of course it's cleared the way to see this magnificent specimen. What a fantastic macrocarpa.
Oh, I think he was always here. We just very difficult to see him in the days before we cleared it out.
How old do you think he is?
Oh, I think he must be, he'd be about 120 or 130 years old, I think. I think that he'd have to be that old.
And a guesstimate as to the girth and the vital statistics here?
Well, we think he's about 16 metres around the girth. And I think about 25 metres high. That's my estimate.
It feels pretty tall from where we're standing.
It looks
anyway.
a long way up, doesn't it?
A great focal point for the dell, though.
Oh, I think so.
Living here has taught me a lot about gardening. I don't want it to be the be-all and end-all about lards. There are other things that we do like to do as well.
Yes, we really enjoy the garden and farming the land, but we're really only caretakers, and I think that no one really has the right to own land. We just borrow it for a lifetime.
Ian and Sue like to share Pukemarama, so it's open to the public from Labour weekend to Christmas, every day except Saturdays. After the break, Maggie's back with gardener Tom Johnson and the lowdown on trimming and caring for box hedge. And Rud tells us all about leaf miners. Situated on the Awhitu Peninsula, this delightful cottage garden has evolved over 100 years. And now Dixie and Ian Craig while away the long summer afternoons there with their 13 grandchildren.
Deck next to a wonderful kauri tree. It's always amazing to see how the leaves of the kauri have these funny scribbly patterns on them. They're called leaf mines, and they're caused by a leaf miner, a creature that goes into the leaf and makes a tunnel by feeding inside the leaf. With the kauri, it might look a bit funny and you might think, oh, is it all right? Yes, it is all right, because the leaf miner and the kauri have lived together for an awfully long time, and neither will ever be negatively influencing each other. So don't worry about them and the kauri. The same would really go for the kakabik, where also leaf miners are active inside the leaves. Now, the kakabik is a bit more delicate, and sometimes, when it's not growing in the right place, can be hammered by its leaf miner. Of course, a native insect living on a native host. Good suggestion here is that after flowering, prune the kakabik a bit, get some of those leaves out of the way, and that might give it a bit of a break. But leaf mines can be a problem on crops such as cabbages. Now, in this case, the leaf miner is a maggot. So there's actually maggots living in between the tissues of the cells inside the leaf. And they make these funny little blotches. In fact, if you have a good look around here, you can see the maggot sitting under the skin, eating away at your cabbage. Again, you can ignore or you can choose to ignore it and do nothing. But if you really must control it on a crop like this, and it is a bit in danger of being totally obliterated, you can use insecticide. Of course, watch your labels and keep the withholding period in check so you don't eat your cabbages too quickly after spraying. But in general, leaf miners are creatures that have adapted themselves to a wonderful lifestyle, living in between the leaf tissues and being totally protected. And what can be better on a beautiful day like today?
It's probably the garden plant of the 90s, the little box hedge. They grow it everywhere throughout New Zealand. They didn't used to, but everybody's cottoned on to how versatile it is. It can be formal, it can be informal. All depends how you use it. And here at the Maggies Garden in Auckland, they use plenty of it. Tom Johnson's well poised here with his hedge clippers. You've got 350 metres of box here, Tom. How often do you have to clip it?
We clip it about 3 or 4 times a year. It grows very vigorously here, Maggie.
It certainly does. How big is this growth here? How much growth have we got here,
We've got
Tom?
about 3 months growth here, Maggie.
So you haven't pruned it for 3 months?
No, it's ready for a haircut now.
And you do it 3 times a year, so we're looking at what? A summer prune, autumn and winter?
That's right, yes.
So how do you go about getting that line straight? Because that's the thing with a box hedge. If it's not straight, it looks pretty awful, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It's very important to have straight lines. It's, in fact, major importance.
So do you use little bits of string, or are you the old-fashioned approach?
No, we have the old-fashioned approach. We don't use strings at all. We just use our eye.
OK, so show me what you do. I can see you're not using the mechanised gear here. You
No,
prefer the old boys?
We prefer these, yes. They're a bit more gentle. So the idea is to trim it back to where it was pruned before. So little by little, we just take the top off like that, using the flat edge of the clipper. This is a flat edge here. So holding that flat on top like that, just go down until you meet the surface where it was trimmed before. And just go over it little by little.
How do you actually know, though, if you've got a young plant? I mean, say you've got something like that, which is, you know, almost the size that people would put it in when it's first in the ground. If you've got something like that, how do you go about training it up to the right height?
Well, a plant like that would continue to grow upwards because the sap always rises to the highest point. So it's very important with young box to just pinch the tip out by cutting it out like that. That encourages basal growth from the bottom of the plant and makes the plant nice and bushy. And that process should continue right through the growing stages of the plant and the development of the hedge.
Because if you didn't take the top of it off, you just let it grow up, because a lot of people want to do that. They want it to grow as fast as possible, don't they? They're in a bit of a hurry. You get a very leggy, sort of stringy looking hedge. You need that bushiness to give you that luxuriant mesh, don't you?
Exactly. And it's even best to trim the sides of each individual plants that form your hedge as well as the top. Trim the sides to create this bushiness.
And once it's established to this height, as you showed us before, you just clip it back. Now, what happens if you use the electric clippers? Because I guess with this much box, it'd take you a power of time to do it with the hand clippers.
Yes, we do. And we do, in places, use the electric clippers, but we find that the bruising that the electric clippers give the plant tend to a lot of sunburn and bad bruising.
It grows out pretty fast, I guess.
It does. It recovers quite quickly, but it looks unsightly for a little while.
Well, you can't have that, can you? You want your box looking good at all times.
Exactly.
Pests and diseases, I see a few snails here, but they don't eat box hedge, do they?
No, they don't seem to eat the hedge, but box is very free from pests and diseases. But we do have a snail problem. It only harbours the snails, and the snails come out at night and graze on the lawn or any other plants that may be growing around, and then in the daytime they move back into the hedge to take refuge.
Snail headquarters.
Absolutely.
So you blitz them in here.
We blitz them in here so they don't get a chance to move out.
They don't need a lot of care, really, do they, the boxes? Unlike the lavender here, which I must say, although the garden is fantastic, Tom, these don't seem to have done so well with the clipping.
No, they don't respond very well to the tight clipping, Maggie. And you can see we get quite a bit of dieback in them like that.
And down here as well, what's happened there where you've shaped them to give a bit of movement to the hedge?
Well, similarly, where the tight clipping has been practiced, the air hasn't been able to get through the plant and disease builds up, and so they tend to look a bit thin.
What will you do with that then?
Well, we're going to take all of this out and replace it with box. It's so versatile, box.
Will you be able to have shaped box like these?
Yes, we will. We've got some, in fact, in another part of the garden, and we're going to train them up and form little poodles out of them.
It is so versatile, isn't it?
It's one of the most useful hedge plants that you can get, and it's small, it's compact, it clips easy, it's very easy to grow, and I think probably the most useful structural plant for this purpose that's available.
Harvest of veggies that comes from 70-year-old Margaret Phillips' Christchurch garden. She's also justifiably proud of her sunflowers, captured here on one of those great clear Christchurch days.
This is Maggie's Garden Show. Well, not many New Zealanders are lucky enough to have kiwi at the bottom of their garden. But this week I'm visiting a woman in Kerikeri who does, and she's going to extraordinary lengths to help protect our national bird.
Derek and Barbara Gibson bought 34 acres of land in Rangatane, south of Kerikeri. They've subdivided most of the property, but have left 10 acres to regenerate back to native bush. This south-facing block has become home to several pairs of kiwi. The species is the North Island brown. They can be heard running and rummaging around the bush, calling to their mates.
So, Barbara, how did you first discover the kiwis were here?
When we first started clearing the land, the site we were going to build a house, put a drive in, we disturbed, or a dog that we had at that stage, disturbed a kiwi off 2 eggs. So there we knew that they were there already, and we found another one in a hakia tree that we were clearing around.
So what steps have you taken to help protect the kiwi?
Well, we got busy planting, replanting natives, barking the gardens as we went for plenty of cover, the areas that we had disturbed, basically. And when we did the subdivision, we put covenants on the land to basically protect the area from stray dogs and encourage the locals to do the same.
As well as that, the entire subdivision has been surrounded with a dog-proof fence, and it's up to property owners to ensure that their dog is spayed or neutered. No breeding dogs are allowed. And possum traps have been elevated to keep nosy kiwi safe.
You'll see up here, Mark, there's a really good spot that kiwis have been at. Spent a lot of time here. Underneath this stump here, you can see where they've excavated that out. A really good station there for the birds.
Looks like a little lookout, doesn't it?
Yeah, probably a great place. Maybe it's even where the hen has sat while the male's been on the egg. There's a pampas bush up there that's great cover for them, great protection for them.
Looks like there's a little trail in through there, doesn't it?
Yeah, you can tell that. You can see the trails, where they go, where they walk. The tracks, they do tend to keep to tracks.
There are other more distinctive signs of activity, such as feathers and droppings, and probe holes where the kiwi push their beaks into the soft earth, or in grass where they turn around and around looking for food.
Well, the fish enjoy the water.
They do. They definitely do. They enjoy their dinner.
Time. What about the kiwis?
Oh, definitely. They do. They need water. It's not really imperative that they have water, but the female, when she's got that big egg inside her, she'll stand in it to just reduce the pressure. And apart from that, just the fact of having the water here, this pond isn't lined, so the water seeps out into the surrounding area. And the bugs, the insects, they'll accumulate closer to the surface.
So it's perfect. The kiwis come for lunch.
They do.
By the pond.
They do. Sounds nice, doesn't it?
So the kiwis actually aren't afraid of water. They quite like it.
No, but if in a stream, fresh water, they will actually cross a stream if they have to and feed on freshwater crayfish.
Chafer beetle grubs and cicada nymphs are favourites of the kiwi. Barbara has planted natives that are kiwi friendly. And berries are also popular.
The kiwi, being a nocturnal bird, can be a little hard to see. But we've brought along all this fancy infrared camera gear, so we're going looking for kiwis. So, Barbara, what are you actually looking for when you go out looking for kiwi?
A call is really, really helpful to find out where they are. Just quietly, listen to the foraging noise. When they're moving around in the bush at night, they are so noisy, so loud. Very easy to find that way.
Yeah. Let's go over there. Have a look over here. This looks interesting.
Well, we heard them, but we never saw them. Barbara and Derek's work has been recognised by the Department of Conservation, who run their own kiwi recovery program. If you notice kiwi on your property, the information on these brochures can help you help the kiwi.
Very tricky, that nocturnal shooting, and we must thank the Natural History Unit here for the use of their footage in that item. Now, this week we're talking silverbeet, aren't we?
Silverbeet is the vegetable of the month. It's a much maligned vegetable and it can be grown all year round. Likes a reasonably rich soil, and the variety that I have preference for is Ford Hook Giant, which is the dark green crinkly form, and there's Lucilis, which is pale green, and there's some rainbow beets which are great for planting out amongst the flower garden.
They would be, especially at this time of year and there's not much colour in the garden.
They're in reds and yellows.
The middle section of it is dying.
Well, I suspect there's a lot of tissue damage up the top there, and it's probably got a fungus disease that's got in. You could have a bit of borer. The reality is it's going to be this winter's firewood for you, because you can have to remove, no, not the whole tree, just that one branch. So if it's cut off well down, the framing behind, that lovely vase framing that's there, is still going to give you that sort of filtered light and backdrop to the garden. It's had a bit of tissue damage, could have been through wind, and it's had a bit of dieback. It may have a little bit of borer. There's a few sort of marks there that suggest that there is. Cut on a sharp angle,
right,
so that no water will lie across it. Just get the chainsaw and make a few lethal cuts and dry it.
I've got a potato vine over here I'm a bit worried about. It's running rampant through the golden elm.
Well, the golden elm's a nice specimen there too. You've got to be a bit careful. It is a very invasive climber. But you can actually trim them when flowering stops, and that's usually just as you head into winter. They only usually have about a 6-week period where they're not flowering. So if you just trim it like a hedge, it'll be controllable. But if it starts strangling up through there, it's going to damage a lot of the sort of young growth that's on the elm and pull it down just by the sheer weight and vigour. Not insurmountable, but you know, having a bit of white in the background there gives a bit of depth to the garden. Well, the ivy's not what you normally see. Most people want to get rid of it, but it works really well along the framings here.
Thank you. Yeah, I keep it trimmed back every few weeks. I like the flat look, but I'd really like to balance it up on this side, Bill. And for the 5 years we've been here, I haven't been able to get it to grow over that side.
Well, where it's growing here, it's actually in soil, and it's all being nutrients up through these heavy pillars that you've got. It's a bit more shaded down the far end there, so it's not quite as spongy as it appears on here. What I suggest, Pauline, is you uplift 3 or 4 of the pavers in the far corner here, plant 3 or 4 little plants of the ivy, so it comes up, it'll give you that reflected pillar effect from this side, and it'll probably join up the top here, where it's taken 5 years to move just over the dorsals at the moment, and should do it much more quickly.
Right.
A bit of slow release fertiliser underneath should be beneficial, and you'll have that Victoriana charm.
Any gardener knows that healthy soil is of vital importance, be it for flower growing or veggie growing. And most of us will be familiar with aspects of organic gardening and the use of compost. Well, today we're going to go a step further and take a look at biodynamics. Dominique Davot used to be a librarian in Paris, and John Guthrie has a marketing background from Australia. They both wanted to get back to the land, and they liked what biodynamics has to offer. So they started Karuna Gardens in 1984. What is biodynamic gardening all about?
It's about healthy soil, healthy plants, plant diversity, incorporating the animals in with the gardens, and also our own lives.
For example, the cows and bees go together because they complement each other in the way they work with the plants and flowers, and helping to produce more nitrogen.
So far it sounds like organics or permaculture, but there must be a difference.
If we look at it, at our area of land as a living organism, and then within that living organism, we use our biodynamic preparations. And I think that other aspect of biodynamics which differs from organics is the use of the cow horn manure and the cow horn silica. The cow horn manure to work in the soil and the cow horn silica to work directly on the foliage of plants.
Now, that may sound a bit cosmic to some of us, but it seems to be working for John and Dominique. In 1984, this lush-looking garden was nothing but bare paddocks. And since then, they've planted all the trees you can see, except for the monkey puzzle in the front garden. They've sustained 2 major droughts and severe floods, but managed to establish a flourishing biodynamic market garden despite it all. Now, I noticed you planted this in a more or less an oval situation. Why is that?
We wanted to create a microclimate,
Yeah.
because here, of course, very windswept from the south, northwester.
From every direction.
Every direction, yes.
Yeah.
So we wanted to create little pockets of more sheltered gardens, and this one has worked very well.
Okay. I see you grow grass here, which tends to be not very edible to humans. Why do you have this patch in grass at the moment?
It's part of our rotation. The gardens are in production for 4 years, growing vegetables, fresh herbs, and then we rest the garden for 3 years, and we sow a variety of grasses, clovers, the chicory, and the cows come on. The cow grazes, the land gets manured. The land has this chance to connect with the animal influence again.
John and Dominique also rotate a diversity of crops within the gardens in active production, with the view to minimize soil depletion. The bees, and especially the cows, are an integral part of Karuna Gardens. They provide some of the essential elements of the biodynamic process. What's that in the jar, John?
It's preparation 500 or cow horn manure.
So, this came out of the back end of a cow?
That's right.
But it doesn't smell like that at all.
Well, that's because it's gone through a process where we put the green manure, the fresh manure, into the cow's horn in the autumn.
Mm-hmm.
We bury it in the ground,
Mm-hmm.
so it stays there for approximately 5 to 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And around the spring equinox, we dig it up, and it's transformed into this substance, which, as I said, we call cow horn manure preparation 500.
It's like putty, isn't it? So you dissolve this in water?
That's correct, yes.
And why do you apply this then to the land?
It's applied to the land so that, you know, as the word says, we're talking about biodynamic, so as to make the soil organisms dynamic. When they become active and full of life, for example, the earthworm, when it is fully dynamic, it starts to ingest the organic matters into the soil. So we create a process where humus is created. So it's not that the 500 is an application of humus, or organic matter, but it's creating a process through the living soil and all the organisms where you create humus and a life in the soil, and, you know, a living earth.
So what you're doing is you're stimulating biological activity.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what we're doing.
To gain the international trademark for biodynamic produce, Demeter, Cowhorn 500 must have been applied twice yearly for 3 years. Then the Biodynamic Farming and Garden Association tests the soil and examines the logbook, accounting for everything that has gone into the garden. If everything is up to standard, they grant the Demeter certification. What do you think of that?
Oh, not quite straight enough. I mean, it would go in the bunch.
Not straight enough.
Yeah, they get too big, we don't send them
You're going
away.
to select them on straightness as well now.
Oh, yes, they've got to look good.
We're getting pretty upmarket here. All right, let's give it a shot, right? And when we open up the compost heap, we find what every gardener knows is brilliant compost. But hey, this is compost with a difference, because in order to make it biodynamic, a lot of different things have to be added, such as chamomile flowers to assist transformation without putrefaction, yarrow, which has concentrates of sulfur, dandelion flower giving strength and vitality, and finally, tincture of valerian, aiding the uptake of phosphorus. It all helps to make this priceless material. Again, it's fairly mind-boggling stuff, but it certainly seems to produce some fine vegetables. Now, look at that. That looks just great. I'm sure that's healthy, too, and it tastes wonderful.
Yes, most of our customers say it's very sweet produce.
And residue-free, eh?
It's as pure as we can possibly grow it.
And that should be the bottom line, don't you think?
Should be, though to an average gardener like me, putting cow manure in a cow horn may seem a bit strange. You certainly can't argue with those results. After the break, Maggie checks out the glorious trees and hedges of the Melbourne garden, Mawalik. When Shirley Smith bought this property a year ago, the garden had been neglected. The trees and shrubs had survived, but the roses were all dead. Shirley wore out a wire brush in the process of scrubbing away at the rotten pieces on the rootstock. The hard labour has paid off, and this delightful garden is the result.
Well done. Get into a Tattersfield bed tonight, 'cause it feels so comfortable, it feels so right. If you know what's good for you, get into Tattersfield. Get into a Tattersfield and you won't want to get out.
Listen to the sound of winter.
Flowering ericas for weeks of colour were $10.95, now $6.95. Champion Copper, an ideal winter clean-up spray, was $8.95, now $6.95.
And a handy hint, use frost cloth to cover young plants to protect them from frost.
Chain cactus, colourful for indoors, was $12.95, now $8.95. Your brightest ever winter is available now
At Apple McCulley's, 4 big Christchurch garden centres.
This is Finish Ultra Plus Concentrate, the automatic dishwashing detergent that only uses half as much, comes in an economical refill pack, and even takes care of your toughest loads. Unbeatable finish.
Breakfast at the Oxford-on-Avon for only $9.95. English cooked breakfast or continental breakfast, including tea, coffee, fruit juice and toast. Only $9.95 for breakfast. Other menus also available. The Oxford-on-Avon in Colombo Street.
The western districts of the state of Victoria is prime wool growing and agriculture country. It's dry though, just 600 millimetres of rain, 23 inches a year. But near the town of Beaufort is a green oasis called Mawalik, an historic house and garden that owes its existence to a natural underground water supply. The garden at Mawalik was first laid out early in the century and remained in the same family until 1980, when Peter and Jocelyn Mitchell purchased the property.
I have to tell you that I didn't know anything about gardening when I came here 16 years ago. My husband bought this property because he liked the farm. And so suddenly I had a historic garden. But with a little help, I soon became very enthusiastic. And now I know I would call myself a dedicated gardener. Now this is the famous Mawalik Spring, Maggie. It flows at the rate of 10,000 gallons an hour. It's beautiful, pure water. And we pump it up to head tanks behind the house. It waters the garden, and we drink it without altering it at all.
Do you think that the presence of the spring was the reason why that people settled on this property in the first place?
Oh, I'm sure it was. I mean, water's such a precious commodity here. Their eyes would have lit up with glee when they saw something like this.
What's actually the origin of the name Mawalik?
Well, the story goes that there were Aborigines camped here at the spring when the first settlers arrived. And they pointed to the bullfrogs and said, Mawalik, Mawalik, Mawalik. And there's the name, Mawalik.
With a guaranteed endless supply of precious water, work began on the garden in 1909. The influential director of the Melbourne Botanic Gardens, William Guilfoyle, was commissioned, and most of his original design is still in existence.
Well, Guilfoyle had a very distinctive style, and it was characterized by sweeping lawns and curving shrubberies. Not a lot of flowers. There's been a number of changes over the years, but the major change was to open the garden at the bottom so that it became not enclosed anymore. And the time this was done, a ha-ha wall was put in, the spring was dammed up to form a lake, and so now when we sit here we can look down at an uninterrupted expanse of grass to the lake. The big thing I've done was realign paths back, but putting them back to Guilfoyle's alignment, because somewhere along the line someone had straightened them. And I think the nice winding paths in this garden are one of its best features.
With a house like this on such an epic scale, Jocelyn, how did you go about deciding what plants would be a suitable foreground for it?
Well, what I mainly kept in mind was the fact that we're outside such a lot in the summer, either having a barbecue on the terrace, playing tennis or playing croquet. So I planned mostly summer flowering perennials, because this is the time of year we'll enjoy them most.
The Artemisia are a lovely rounded shape here. They don't get lost on the scale of this border either.
Well, we do clip them, and the idea of the Artemisias is that they provide some structure during the winter months when most of the perennials are dormant.
And the summer feature in spring, that sea foam's a good one, isn't it? It does well for you here.
Yes, it does, and it provides a lovely backdrop to the border, and also it's quite nice sitting up behind it on the terrace.
This is an amazing feature with the daisies. I've never seen them used like this. How did it come about?
Well, these were here when I came, although I know they're not on the original plan, where the conformation here was quite different. But they're always remarked on by visitors, and people fear to tread on them.
Well, yes, it is. It's sort of quite daunting, isn't it? Shall we give it a try, though? How often do you clip them back?
We clip them hard once a year, and sometimes if we have a special occasion, we might give them a little trim a few weeks before just to freshen them up. But otherwise, they don't take any care at all.
And they look great. It's like a waterfall cascading down the hill. How long has the Pleach Lime Avenue been in?
Well, only 9 years. This is a part of the garden that I added myself. And it's very different in character, as I'm sure you can see from the Guilfoyle part of the garden.
Works well, though.
Well,
great to lead you down here.
Yes, well, that was the idea, to lead you down with a nice view of the lake.
Did you find it tricky to train it or pleach it along these wires, Joss?
Well, it's not too difficult. You just prune all branches off there and train each limb along 5 wires we've put in here. Then in the winter it's pruned, and every summer it's clipped to keep it in a hedge-like shape.
A notable feature of this now mature Guilfoyle designed garden has been the careful placement and use of specimen trees. But with the warm climate and unlimited water supply, many have now grown to an enormous height, and careful pruning and maintenance is needed to preserve them and keep them shapely.
Now this tree, Maggie, is one of the original plantings. It's a Quercus roba crosscanariensis.
A grand old oak tree indeed.
And it is growing in a very extraordinary fashion. If you can see the knobs on some of these branches, obviously someone has cut it back at some stage, and now it's got a weeping habit. And it just spreads and spreads and spreads.
It's a wonderful shape, isn't it? Great big underneath here. So this is about 90 years old.
Yes, yes. The garden was laid out over the years 1908, 1909.
Oh, fantastic tree.
Yes.
Go home and cut my oak to be like this. You've come up with a great way of overcoming the dry shade problem under these big trees, all these broad swathes of plants. What are your most useful ones?
This Plectranthus is very useful. And one of your New Zealand plants here, the Fuchsia procumbens.
That's a great little ground cover. With the blue pollen.
Yeah.
It's a neat plant.
Little red berries it has too. You find that you must plant them in large areas because it would look bitsy.
So you go for the en masse effect.
We try to do that, yes, yes.
What happened over here, Jocelyn? It's a bit of a gap.
Yes, the rabbits have been in here, and they are quite a problem in the garden. And in fact, most Victorians will tell you they're a problem. New plantings, I put wire around to protect them until they've matured.
I noticed some of those metal rings around the trees. Does that indicate that you've got possum problems as well?
It certainly does. Yes, possums are a big problem here too. And those metal things do stop them climbing the trees. And unlike you, they're protected in this country.
A wide range of possum-proof hedging plants have been used to good effect throughout the garden. Some have been carefully controlled, others have reached epic proportions. The big macrocarpus are a real feature. Are they original?
Yes, yes, they are, Maggie. but they're a lot of work. They have to be clipped twice a year, in spring and in autumn.
It's very wide, isn't it?
Well, it is, Maggie, and it shouldn't be like that. At some stage in its life, it's been let go, probably during the war. And once that happens, you can't cut back into the dead wood. So it's much too wide.
I've noticed some of the other macrocarpus bulging a bit. What would have caused that?
Well, that's caused by the same problem. They've been let grow too wide and they're bulging out. And we've tried to pull them in, but it doesn't work. We're going to have to replace them very soon, I'm afraid.
Really? Bite the bullet and take them out?
I think we'll have to do that, yes.
Will you replace them with macrocarpa again?
I think so, because I don't know anything else that grows as quickly.
As you can imagine, the work required to keep an historic property of this size up to scratch and looking good is constant and ongoing.
There's a lot of development work and still a lot of restoration to do in this garden, and maybe I'm just impatient, but I do get very frustrated sometimes. There's definitely times when I feel it's a burden, and I might like to just go somewhere and have a little cottage and a little garden of my own, but basically I love it.
The glorious garden of Mawalek in Melbourne. And hello to Robina Westenra of Tauranga, who wrote to us to say that Mawalek was once her family home. Small world, isn't it? After the break, Jack has pointers on caring for the ever-popular cyclamen. And Rud has the lowdown on the not-so-popular mosquito. Such is Belle Hale's passion for roses that she now has one for each of her 78 years. Belle's Waihi garden was once a sloping lawn with just some veggies and shrubs. But after a few years of putting in, pulling out and shifting round, Belle now has a garden with year-round colour and interest.
To try as gardeners. Just when you're sitting in the garden working away nicely in the summer or autumn, out come all these mosquitoes everywhere to make life a bit of a misery. Now, before we can actually control or do anything about mosquitoes, we've got to know a little bit about their habits, what they do, and about their habitats. They are, of course, living in watery conditions, that is, their larvae. Anything, ponds, blocked guttering, gully traps, buckets with water, stagnant water, anywhere, they'll go for it. So if we clean that up, we can actually reduce the amount of mozzies that are breeding in our environment. It might be difficult from time to time, but it can be done. On top of that, if you've got a garden like this with a lot of relative humidity under the leaves, lots of bushes, lots of green foliage and things like that, you will get a lot of adult mosquitoes hiding there during the day and waiting for you to come out do your gardening. People sometimes ask me, how can I eradicate mosquitoes from my garden? Eradication is a big word, and I always recommend my favorite insecticide, napalm. You get it from an army surplus store, of course. But look, there is really nothing that beats the good old repellent. If you're working away in the garden, just smear it over yourself and you'll be fine. There is no way you can get rid of them. Just live with them. And one other thing. Be glad we live in New Zealand, where the mosquitoes that occur here do not transmit all these nasty diseases like they do overseas. So thank goodness for our quarantine system in keeping these nasty vectors out, which enables us, despite the mosquitoes, to do some happy gardening.
You're with Maggie's Garden Show. Now this is the time of the year when many of us go out to a garden centre and buy cyclamen. Or perhaps we just recently got one as a gift. But how to get the best out of them in the home? Well, the thing about cyclamen is they really like it cool, but what we do is we get our cyclamen, we put them in the warmest part of our house. This time of the year we might have the fire going or heaters going, and which is great for us, but it's not great for cyclamen. And what happens is they stretch, they don't last in flower, and you don't get the best out of them that you could possibly get. I remember one of my first ever jobs when I got into horticulture was growing cyclamen, and I used to have to go into the hothouse every day and sprinkle the plants with water just to keep that foliage cool. So they say that a really hard, tough cyclamen is a good one, but how to do that in the home? Well, one thing is to get your cyclamen and occasionally give it a rest in a cool part of the garden. If you've got two cyclamen, for example, if you've got that one and perhaps this one, you can put one in the garden for a week in a cool place, say underneath a tree or just somewhere that's really nice and cool, and then you can bring it into the house and alternate it with your other cyclamen. So that's a good way of doing it. But those are the key things. Keeping it cool is the main thing. Don't water too much, just water when the plant needs to be watered. A little bit of liquid feed occasionally. There's one other tip that I've heard of for keeping your cyclamen cool, and that is to get an ice block or a block of ice, put it on the top of the potting mix underneath that foliage, and let that block of ice melt away so that the cool water goes down around the roots of the plant. Sounds a bit of a daft idea to me, but I just thought I'd let you know anyhow. So there we are. That's with the bigger flowered types of cyclamen. But also available through garden centres now are these delightful little mini cyclamen, and beautiful fragrance. They're really, really pretty little plants, and they appeal to me a lot. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make up a trough of mini cyclamen, and let's see how that looks. And just planting in an ordinary tub and terracotta potting mix, and mixing up my colours. Perhaps I'll go for a white one next. So I've started off with a rather strong, deep shade and a white one adjacent to that. Look at that foliage as well. It's not just the flowers that are so delightful, it's that foliage which is very, very attractive. In fact, this one, I think, is absolutely beautiful. Worth growing for its leaves alone, quite apart from the flowers, which are a real bonus. And finishing off with a little pink one. And once again, this, as you can see, has got a very, very pretty leaf. Look at that. I mean, as you can see, they really are worth growing for their leaf, quite apart from their flower. And the other good thing about the minis is they really seem to be quite perennial. They're more perennial than the larger flowered types once you get them into the garden. But of course, all good things must end, and so it is with cyclamen. And what happens is in a couple of months, the cyclamen are going to look a bit like this, which is all very sad. But when they do get a bit tatty and their flowering is almost finished, the thing to do is, first of all, pull off those old flower stems, pull them right off so they come off right at the base of the plant. And get rid of all of those, and then you're just left with the foliage. Now, this is presuming that you want to keep your cyclamen. You can chuck it in the compost heap, which is what I tend to do. But if you want to keep it for next year, if you want to put it in the garden, then get rid of those old flowers, get the plant and find a nice cool spot in your garden to get it through the summer. You can plant it in the garden. As I mentioned with the minis, it's well worth planting those in the garden. With the larger flowered types, you just might want to leave it in the pot in the garden for the summer and then repot it, say, about next March. And the sort of spot to find in the garden, well, this is typical of what a cyclamen would like. You can see we've got ferns growing, it's shady, it is cool, of course, for ferns, and that's the kind of spot where the cyclamen would really do well. So there we are. There's a few things to get the best out of your cyclamen over the next couple of months, and a few ideas for what to do to them after that.
Thanks, Jack. And yes, I did get a cyclamen for Mother's Day, one of those lovely, fragrant mini ones. Next week, Jack will be looking at planting box hedge. After the break, the Auckland garden that helped designer Silla Cooper win big at the latest awards. And Bill joins me with gardening advice for the week ahead. A working mother of 3, Claire Williamson spends what little free time she has in her South Canterbury garden. Her husband Garth lends a hand with some of the larger projects, though Claire tells me she's still waiting for the gazebo. I know exactly how she feels.
Garden Design with New Zealand Gardener magazine.
At the last awards for the Landscape Industries Association of New Zealand, a relatively new landscape designer took 3 major awards. One design by landscape designer Cilla Cooper took the under $30,000 award, the Best Residential Design, and the Landscape of the Year award. The garden in question is here in Mount Eden in Auckland. While the front of Sally and Dennis's villa maintains its traditional face, the back of the house has been radically redesigned.
I felt it had a wonderful feeling for great indoor-outdoor living already established, so I wanted to build on that, to work with that and further extend that concept out into the garden.
It's a very structural kind of garden, with hard edges and things like that, quite contemporary. Is that typical of your approach?
Well, I guess this is typical of my approach generally. I like to work with pre-existing features and especially the existing architecture of the house. So that for me really gave me my cue and dictated a lot of what I did from there on in.
Compared to the renovations, the garden was fairly unexciting. A typical Kiwi backyard with lots of lawn, the old brick barbecue, and a raw timber fence along one boundary. What were the requirements of the brief?
The clients were wanting a low-maintenance garden. They're both busy working people with two children, two school-aged children. They wanted a garden that they could entertain in, but would also adapt well for family usage so that the children could also have their part of the garden.
The veranda roof gave Cilla the cue for the design of the pergola. This outdoor living space mirrors the veranda right down to the hit and miss lattice pattern. Cilla's trained table grapes up the poles, which will eventually climb over the pergola and provide summer shade. She's also extended the false walls from the deck into the garden by building a number of screens.
We had an existing fence that I wasn't so happy with working with, so I decided to build within that boundary and create something that was perhaps just a little bit more intimate and closed off within this entertainment zone.
The non-slip concrete pavers are a practical all-weather surface and provide a good transition from the house through to the lawn area, where the children have the trampoline. The pavers are repeated around the edges of the garden to make a mowing strip and to link that area back to the rest of the garden. The sawtooth pattern is repeated throughout. Even though it's winter, the plants still look really good. They're strong and structural too. Tell me a little bit about the kinds of plants you used and why you used them.
In this case, we decided to opt for a Mediterranean type of theme, a New Zealand version of a Mediterranean theme, using plants such as olives, echiums, agave, lavender, cistus and daylilies, together with a few New Zealand plants, arthropodium, which we use quite extensively here.
The way Cilla mixes foliage textures is particularly effective, contrasting broad-leafed plants with small, tight ground covers. Of course, the test for any garden design is whether or not it gets used. The #1 priority of Cilla's brief was to give Sally and Dennis relaxed outdoor family living. It's really nice right now with the four of us sitting here, the garden and the courtyard, just the right scale for the small group. But how flexible is it really?
Well, at Christmas, for example, we brought all the furniture down here, tables and chairs. I think we had about 17 or 18 friends and family, and it was neat just to open it all up. We were able to bring the food down. It's not far from the kitchen, as you can see. It was lovely just to have it all open.
How does the garden work now, Sally, now that it's finished? Does it do all the things that you thought it would?
Yes, very much. We use it for eating out here. We eat here in the evening or in the weekend often. We sit out and watch the garden. And Dennis and I often sit out later in the evening. Because we went with Scylla's advice and lit the garden, we tend to sit out on the chairs on the deck in the evening and when it's dark and look at it.
As night falls, the garden assumes a magical air. It's a credit to the designer's imagination and the owner's sense of adventure.
For more information on Scylla Cooper and her garden design ideas, see this month's issue of New Zealand Gardener magazine.
Great effect with the lighting there, wasn't it?
Lighting's important to put romance in the garden.
Isn't it so, Bill? You all need a bit of romance in our lives, don't we? Well, this is my favourite part of the programme, I think. Tummy always rules, you know. Feijoas this week. They're at the height of the season, and Mary's created this wonderful Feijoa cheesecake for us.
It tastes
Yummy?
delicious. I'll let you have some now. The variety here that Mary's used is called Mammoth, and there's several other varieties. Triumph are two older ones, and Apollo, Gemini, and Unique, more modern cultivars. They've been around probably 7 or 8 years.
Mammoth ones are great, aren't they? Because you don't spend ages cutting and scooping.
That's because you've grown seedlings in the past, and the fruit from seedling varieties are often sort of inferior. You can never be sure what you're going to get. They only make a small tree, around about the 3 metre mark by 2 to 3 metre wide. Great for borders, make quite a nice small specimen tree, and will surprisingly do quite well in tubs.
Good for coastal planting too, aren't they, Feijoas?
Well, you've planted some, haven't you?
Have indeed. Down at the beach, hedge of Feijoas. Not doing very well though, Bill.
Well, one of the tricks with anything that fruits as heavily as these do is to actually plant, to fertilise more regularly, and that means sort of March and September are the ideal months. If you haven't done it pre-autumn, do it now while the fruit's on there, just to give the plant some food that it's going to actually generate and provide you with good flower buds for fruiting potential for next year.
Definitely where I've gone wrong. No fertilising. Got to feed them. Frosty too, isn't it? Very chilly out at the moment.
It was cold this morning.
Yeah. What do we have to look after? These
Varieties?
Yes, beautiful, aren't they?
If you're in a frost tender area where the frosts are actually falling, remember you're going to have to cover, and there's a product out called frost cloth which is really beneficial. Don't go using plastic. Newspaper's fine because it's absorption, but often it pays to leave a little lift above the plant so that the air ventilation can get around. Bougainvilleas, hibiscus are another couple of susceptible plants.
It's often very sombre in the garden, isn't it, during winter? What's a good plant to be having now for colour?
Well, travelling around the countryside, I've noticed the Protea family are looking particularly good at the moment, and the Queen Protea is that lovely silvery pink, which is quite huge, the size of a small plate, about the size of what Mary's got in front of us here, I guess. And the Nerifolia forms are coming into their own, and they're the ones with black tips, and they're available in white.
They're stunning, aren't they, for floral arrangements?
Yeah, and great bird food too for the winter, so if you're keen on keeping the birds around your garden, ideal plant to have for them as well. There's a little charmer called Protea scolimacephala. Yeah, isn't that a name?
Very good, I'm impressed.
It's a big name for a little flower. It's only about the size of a 50-cent piece, and it's green. And green's a real sort of in voguish colour for floral work. Great for a rockery. Remember, Proteas don't like fertiliser, so no phosphates. So don't plant them with blood and bone or superphosphate. If you have, and your plants have collapsed, that's one of the reasons. They like free drainage, so no wet patch either.
And what about the forget-me-nots? We do want to plant forget-me-nots, don't we?
Oh, the flower garden. You're always into the flower garden.
I love my flowers.
There's some little charmers in the forget-me-not range at the moment, and they're quite compact, a bit like lobelias in form. White, pink and blue. Not like that sort of variety that sort of self-seeds and covers great areas of your garden.
And now gardening events this week. There's the Horticultural Trade Expo on in Auckland. It runs from the 21st to the 23rd of May at the Pavilion of New Zealand in Mangere. Bill's old mate, Prof Walker, will be there giving a talk on Wednesday. And in Devonport, it's the Garden and Floral Art Club's 50th anniversary luncheon. Coming up on the show next week, Rud finally finds a use for the dreaded wild ginger when he visits the IHC paper mill in Whangarei. Maggie checks out the Manawatu garden of Sue and Ian McKelvey. And Bill goes to Tipuki in search of self-confessed dahlia nut Peter Burl. That sounds interesting.
It's an interesting piece, and dahlias are wonderful flowers for autumn.
Jolly good, I look forward to that. And we'll see you again next week. Till then, good night.
Cheers.
Maggie's Garden Show was brought to you with the support of Watkins. Next up tonight on One, Georgia engineers her own apparel.
Hello, welcome to the Garden Show. I'm Judy Bailey and I'll be your host for the next couple of months while Maggie's away overseas. Well, winter may be on its way, but there's always plenty to do in the garden. Jack has tips on planting lily bulbs and growing palms later on. Also on tonight's show, we visit Gola Peaks, John and Gay Rutherford's high country garden. Mark Leishman experiences life in the slow lane when he investigates the pros and cons of keeping donkeys on a lifestyle block. And I meet an Auckland woman who always has beautiful roses, whatever the weather. First though, Rud goes north.
If you're ever up here in Kaitaia and you come... Fire, I'd always had a love of hot foods and that from growing up in the islands. And it was just a matter of a combination of the two.
Gary, what's involved in the business?
Well, I start out with importing seed from America. That I then planted in a tunnel house and raised up. The seedlings are pricked out and planted in the ground after it's been harrowed up. Ultimately harvest, which is processing, pickling the product, and then marketing. Essentially, I do the whole thing.
How are people reacting to the chili peppers?
Well, I like to think that I'm having some effect on changing people's tastes. Catering probably the fact that their tastes are more cosmopolitan and offering them the chance to try local hot products.
Education of the pupils.
I like it.
Gary is growing 15 varieties of peppers for bottling and for sauces. The peppers to be used for the sauces are put into fermentation barrels with some salt to control the sugars. And then after several months, it's down to Auckland to be turned into sauce with the help of a food technologist.
Yeah, well, this is the chili museum.
Chili museum?
Yeah. My different varieties of chilies, which I use mainly for these ones in particular for pickling, because the different shapes and colours in the chilies provide lovely aesthetic appeal, you know, in the jars when they're pickled up.
Do the colours remain in the jars?
They do for probably a year or so. They do fade over time. But initially when they're pickled fresh, you know, they're lovely colours in there. It does, the colour and the heat in the chilies does after a time go into the pickling medium.
What's this wonderful purpley looking thing?
I call it Purple Delight, although I think its proper name is the piquine.
Piquine, okay. And there's a strange looking capsicum type thing there. It looks a bit like a scallopini, really.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a Scotch bonnet from the West Indies. A variety of the habanero, the hottest chili in the world. It's a lovely shape, isn't it, all crumpled up like that? And I guess, not that I've ever seen one, I guess they look like that's what a Scotch bonnet looks like.
Never seen one, have you?
Never been to Scotland. I kind of like the music.
Crop and food research in Pukekohe have given Gary varieties from Bolivia and Argentina to test with varying results.
In my experimental crop here, Rud, we had a bad flood, December of '95. It just smothered everything for 3 days in water, and most of the stuff drowned off. This, what survived, I haven't obviously got names for, as they are experimental, all they are is numbers, but these ones here did survive, and quite an attractive chili.
Gary, how do you grow a good chili?
Well, we're frost-free up here in Kaitaia, so obviously they like warmth. You can grow them anywhere, but they do like heat. The more heat, the better. The soil requirements, they like a lot of potash and medium pH.
Now, what about organic matter? Are they compost feeders?
They are, yeah, they're gross feeders. They love compost.
Any major pests and diseases?
Well, we've had a few problems with pukekos and wild turkeys. The pukekos we chase away, and the wild turkeys, of course, are very edible.
Unlike the pukeka.
Unlike the pukeko. Yeah. We've also had a few problems with caterpillars, greasy cutworm. I try not to spray simply because of the cost of spraying and the effect it might have on the consumer. So it's just a matter of realising that a certain percentage of your crop is going to be lost to those kind of things.
The farm tries to use mainly organic methods of control. Gary and his team hoe down the weeds, and in one area they're experimenting with sawdust and sheets of paper for weed control.
Hey, is it true that the more you pick from the plants, the more they fruit?
Certainly is, yep. The more you take it off, the more they come back. Just, I guess it's a reproductive thing.
What's the variety we're walking in here?
These are long red cayenne, or capsicum frutescens, which are the main ingredient in Kaitaia fire chili sauce.
The hot stuff, eh?
That's the one.
Hey, how long is the growing season? How long can you harvest these?
Well, we put them in the ground about November, and we start harvesting in February. It probably goes right through till late June.
A lot of work.
A lot of work. Well, Rod, in the chili world, this is it. This is the habanero. There is no hotter.
Hot. Rud's still got steam coming out his ears. After the break, I meet an Auckland woman who has beautiful roses all year round because she makes them out of paper. And Jack has a few hints on planting lily bulbs. This week's 4 top-notch viewers' gardens will receive the Reader's Digest Encyclopedia of Gardening. 50 buckets of stones were carried from the site of Marlene Cresswell's townhouse garden in Nelson before the 4-year task of transforming it could even begin. Marlene's justifiably proud of her efforts and tells me that a regular dose of farm manure keeps everything blooming.
If you're thinking about buying a home, with Ergo, you can organise your home loan over the phone. It's that easy. So pick up the phone and call Ergo now on 0800 680 680.
So little, once it is changed, changes back.
Only thing I know is love is a chain of love. Same as nature's a chain of life.
The harp of voices telling a story. It's the grasshopper.
You know, there are many people who think that the foreigners have been doing a lot of things right lately. Well, good luck to them. Mind you, there is another school of thought that believes that our record of craftsmanship, quality, attention to detail, and quite frankly, pedigree, will always stack the odds unfairly in our favor. Now, you might very well think that. But of course, I couldn't possibly comment.
Florist or dial direct.
When you have indigestion, whether it's heartburn or sharp pains, queasy sensations, or that knotted up feeling, try new Andrews Antacid tablets. Andrews Antacid tablets quickly calm and soothe, and there are 4 fruit flavors, so your stomach will be feeling better in no time. Andrews Antacid tablets calm and soothe heartburn and indigestion.
Oh, hi. Everyone has plans for the future. Some big, some not so big. But it's always nice to have something to look forward to. And I've found a faster way to save for what I want. Right, Maury? It's an accelerator account from ASB Bank. It pays a high rate of interest plus bonus interest every month if I don't make any withdrawals. Whatever you're saving for, you'll get there faster with an accelerator.
The Accelerator account, only from ASB Bank, your future bank.
Who can forget the elation?
The America's Cup is now New Zealand's Cup.
Who can forget the excitement
We've done the impossible.
that surrounded New Zealand's finest ever sporting achievement?
We knew we had a considerably faster boat.
TV1 can't. That's why tonight there's a television first to mark the anniversary of this famous victory.
It was huge. Up here is as important as anything else.
So pull out the Red Sox for Black Magic, the Team New Zealand story, premiering 8:35 tonight on One.
You're with Maggie's Garden Show, and I'm admiring one of the world's most beautiful flowers, the lily. And these are Asiatic lilies. Now, of course, at this time of the year, lilies in your garden are dormant. These have been grown as cut flowers in a greenhouse, but they do show what you can aspire to next summer. Asiatics will flower before Christmas. They have upward-facing flowers. They don't have a fragrance, but they're dead easy in the garden. Of course, at Christmas, you have your Christmas lilies. After Christmas, you have your orientals. So with a bit of planning, you can have lilies in your garden flowering right through summer. In front of me, I have a container with a quite different type of lily. This is a new hybrid called an LA hybrid. This particular one is called Apricot Blush. Hybrid between the Asiatic lily and the Christmas lily, and it's got some of the best characteristics of both its parents. But it's what we do now, both in containers and in the garden, that will determine how well our lilies flower for us next summer. The first thing is the soil. Now, I've got a spot here. It's good and sunny. That's very important. The soil is pretty well drained. That's most important. It's a bit like the rhododendrons. There's 3 rules when it comes to growing lilies. They are drainage, drainage, and drainage. And so fork over the soil or dig it over as I'm doing here. This is pretty well drained, but if you have a soil which is very heavy, a very clay soil, which is going to waterlog, that's no good for lilies at all. You've got to do something about it. The easiest thing to do is get something like pumice sand or gravel or something that's very coarse, very well drained, and work that into the soil. And that will improve the drainage. It means that you can grow lilies in places that otherwise they would not thrive. Just get that worked into the soil like that, and that will improve the drainage of the soil enough to grow the lilies. Now, how to plant? Well, there's nothing too much to it. It's a matter of getting the right depth. One thing you'll notice when you buy your lily bulb from a garden centre is that it comes in a plastic bag, normally, with some material around it to keep it moist. And you can see here we have a lily bulb. It's a very nice little bulb. And that's the important point. Lilies must never be allowed to dry out. So as soon as you buy that lily bulb, the best thing is to take it home, get it planted right away. Now, the hole should be around about 10 centimetres deep. Put your lily bulb in at 10 centimetres depth, around about that, cover it over, and you've done the job. Now, when the growth commences, which is normally about October, at that time, give the lily a fertiliser, general fertiliser or a slow-release fertiliser, just to feed it through those summer months. Now, how to grow them in containers? Well, not very difficult at all, to be honest. You can grow any lily you like in a container. I like the Asiatics because they're not so tall. They're dead easy, as I mentioned. The flowers face upwards, which is good for a plant in a container. Once again, get your lily bulb out of the sawdust or whatever it comes in, like that, and then just dig a hole in your potting mix about 10 centimetres deep. Put the lily in at that depth and cover it over. Couldn't be simpler. Now, I like to put about 3 lily bulbs in a container, and you can mix the lilies with other things. You could put alyssum in that container as well, for example, and that could spill over the sides and the lilies would come up. They will flower, if they're an Asiatic, about November, December. An Oriental, of course, will flower after Christmas. The other thing that lily bulbs, or at least the lily flowers, need when they come up is some support. And what I've done, I've got a bit of number 8 wire. I've just twisted it with a loop in the top. It's very basic. If that's a little too rustic for you, you can buy a similar thing in garden centres, and that will support the lily flowers as this one here is doing. This is a bought support, and that's doing the same job, but this is a darn sight cheaper. So there we are. Those are a few basic rules with growing lilies. If you take care of the drainage, that's the key thing, you'll get displays like this.
Gardeners never tire of the rose. The beauty of its blooms is the stuff of poetry. And we're prepared to put in endless hours of work, spraying and feeding and pruning these thorny monsters, just to provide the perfect petals. And then before you know it, they've faded and gone. Well, Caroline Vickers wasn't prepared to put up with that. Her roses last forever.
Je vois la vie en rose. Il me dit des mots d'amour, des mots de tous les jours, et ça me fait quelque chose.
Caroline, what prompted you to start making paper roses?
We'd just completed renovations in the bedrooms and we painted the walls a creamy yellow colour, and I wanted roses to match, yeah. And I bought some yellow ones and they died so quickly in the Auckland heat. So then I went around looking for artificial ones and couldn't find any that I liked. They all looked mass-produced and not
Really
quite real.
So Caroline decided to make her own. The first step to a realistic rose was to study its anatomy. And that meant hours poring over every rose book she could find.
When you look at a rose, you don't realise how many petals are actually in the bloom and how they fit in and how they're cupped, how the base of the petal is cupped. And when you hold a rose in your hand, all the petals are the same height. So it's not until you actually pull the whole thing apart that you can tell all these things. To make them look real, you have to really copy nature.
Caroline spent 6 months experimenting with colour and different crepe papers, eventually deciding to colour the paper herself.
I dye the paper, I spray it. I tried dipping it, but when you take the paper out of the dye bath, it just rips. It's like tissue paper.
Does it just dry naturally? You don't use a hairdryer or whatever?
No, I have to let it dry naturally. Otherwise it would shrink too much. And dye the paper green. And I just glue 2 together to make them a bit stronger onto wire. I was going to use silk leaves, but I didn't like them. They looked too artificial, and I thought if I have gone to all the trouble of making the rose, I'm not going to put an artificial. People think my roses are real and that I can work from home, work my own hours.
After the break, Maggie visits a North Canterbury garden that spends part of every year under snow. 10 years of trial, error and hard work.
Want some bread?
It's all right, Billy.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Oh, hi.
They're meant for life, you know.
Wouldn't that be nice? Biscuit, Billy?
Thank you. Here, boy.
Would you like some coffee?
Thanks.
Michael?
Are you Rebecca? Rebecca?
Time to go, Billy.
Home to Dad?
My daddy doesn't live with us anymore. Love is what you're looking for.
The Power of Love 3 with the Honey Drippers. Cyndi Lauper, George Michael, Simply Red. 18 timeless love songs on one memorable album. Celine Dion, Marvin Gaye, Katie Lang. The Power of Love 3, an unforgettable album.
Give your mother a living gift, created by nature,
Cyclamens, beautiful in flower, were $11.95, a gift at $7.95. Sturdy leaf rakes were $10.95, now $5.95.
And a handy tip, use Compost Maker to make autumn leaves into great compost for next season.
Mowing and raking gloves, value at $3.60, now only $2.50. And colour pots for great winter colour, a gift at $9.95. Gifts created by nature.
At Athol McCulley's, 4 big Christchurch garden centres.
Every step along the way, with them on their first big day. Give them all the love that you've got. It's growing up sure takes a lot. Meadow fresh milk plays its part. Recycling for a healthy start. You've done the most that you could do. The rest of all I know to.
Meadow Fresh Milk. Good health naturally. Set sail in the Whitsundays with Air New Zealand Holiday on board your own luxury charter. Then live it up at Queensland's biggest resort. Visit a hidden city high in Peru that was the outpost of the Inca Empire. It's a magical place that will leave you breathless with wonder. And a rich man's folly, Hearst Castle on California's coast. See the world from your armchair with your personal travel guide. Air New Zealand Holiday, 6:30 Saturday on TV1.
Beyond these fertile northern Canterbury plains is the isolated existence of high country sheep station life. The rugged beauty of the foothills of the Great Southern Divide makes it one of the most dramatic environments in New Zealand. Around 2 hours' drive from Christchurch is John and Gay Rutherford's Gola Peak Sheep Station. John's family has been farming in the region for generations, and the land and its history is his life.
When I bought this property here, and Gay and I got married, we came up and we selected a house site, and we picked one with the sunshine.
So what did the site actually look like when you came here, John?
Well, Maggie, it looked like the side of the hill over there. Fairly steep and covered in tussocks.
Did you have to do much work on it?
Well, we got a man with a big bulldozer in here, and we left him here for a week, and he left us with a quarry site, dusty and barren.
Oh, well, you've done a lot with it. I mean, you're the man who's sculptured out these steps and put the railway pylons on. But what about these arches? Are they tricky to make?
Well, I enjoy making them. I started off making farm gates and then progressed to garden arches and garden furniture, which mostly Gay designs and I make, and we have a lot of fun doing it.
Now, tell me about what it was like when you first came here.
Well, it's a comparatively isolated place to be living, and it was busy when I was first up here. The children were young, I was teaching correspondence, there were a lot of men to feed, so it was really good to be able to get outside and create a garden.
Under snow for up to 4 months of the year, life, let alone gardening, can be difficult. Since 1978, the Rutherfords have been battling against the elements to create their own garden. What's your prevailing wind on this property?
The prevailing wind is the nor'wester, which comes screaming over the Puketereki range behind us. But of course, the whole garden is very windy. We planted a row of pine trees, which have now been removed, and we've got Oregons, the Douglas fir, planted in their place. So that's giving us the shelter. And I had an avenue here of a Russian olive growing. And we came home, and of the 8 of them, at Christmas time one year, the 8 of them, 5 of them were lying on the ground. So.
Blown away, literally.
Blown
huh?
away.
So anything down
Blown
here
away.
has to be pretty sturdy, obviously.
Yes, it does.
But, you know, I can't get over this. I've been looking at it. The lilac, flowering at the end of November.
But of course, we're 1,800 feet above sea level. And at the end of September, we had 6 inches of snow on the ground.
Does the snow do a lot of damage to your plants?
Well, it does really, but often it's hard to tell that it's done any damage until about this time of the year. When you, like that hebe there, you find something that's got a dead piece in the middle, so you cut it out, and then you're left with a hole.
Sure sign of snow damage.
Sure sign of snow damage.
Now, I've seen photographs of what the scree slope used to look like, and it was pretty grim. How did you decide on the plants that would cover it?
Well, Maggie, we live in this wonderful country filled with tussocks and beech forest. The beech trees, for instance, they came from our forest way up about, half an hour's drive from here. And they grow so well and they handle our conditions very well. The hebes, they come from down by the stream, and they're very hardy, and they're good in the snow. And of course, the country's covered in tussocks, so it just seemed the right thing to do to put the tussocks in here as well.
I love that tussock, and I really like the way that you've incorporated the vegetation and the colours of the landscape into the garden.
Well, when you look, you see that the colour of the tussocks is the gold, and so I put the thuya there. The colour of the sage brings in the rock and the matagari, and of course on the rock is the grey, that wonderful lichen, and it's the grey of the lamb's ears. So I've tried to bring one into the other, and when the roses are flowering, they are also yellow, and so it brings the same yellow into the garden. Around the hot colour of the brick of the house, I like the cooler, soft green with the white flowers, the variegated leaves, the creamy coloured flowers.
This choicey is a very good plant, and you've got a lot of it here in the garden. It obviously does well for you.
It does do well. It looks wonderful all during the winter. It looks green and lush and neat and tidy. And at this time of the year, of course, there's flowers on it as well. It's a very good one for planting in this type of climate.
And looks very elegant reflected in the water, I must say. I'm trying to work out what you've got done here with the pool. Is that actually black?
We've painted it black, partly for the reflections, and also because it suits the environment better, because of the tussocks all around, and it holds the heat.
It's very hot and dry, particularly on this bank. Is water a problem for you in the garden?
Maggie, it is really. I've got one hose, which I share with the stock, but for a garden of this size, it really isn't enough.
I guess that's why you have to go for the drought-resistant plants up here.
Yes, I do. Down here, I've got a ceanothus. It's great because it fills up a huge area. It's a good colour.
And it looks great, too. It's a wonderful blue, doesn't it? What about these little things like this daisy? Does that sort of seed through for you?
Yes, it seeds very readily. It's all around the garden. I did plant a little row was along here, which the rabbits, which I reluctantly share with the garden with, not only the rabbits, the opossums, the sheep graze the lawn occasionally.
Oh, no, so they ate the lot.
They ate the lot.
Oh.
But then, of course, there are things that the rabbits don't eat at all, such as angelica. It seeds readily around the garden, and it's got such a wonderful glossy green leaf, and it's marvellous architectural form.
And it's a good plant, angelica, isn't it?
It's just great.
I bet the rabbits wouldn't go in too much for the Nepeta either.
No, they don't eat that either. In the winter, it dies down completely, and then the spring comes, of course, and the green comes, and then the flowers, which are also soft and fluffy.
It looks great growing in amongst the steps like this, got against that wood.
That's good, really, isn't it? All the colours go well together.
Ever aware of the imposing and dramatic landscape, the Rutherfords have emphasised the strong lines of their surroundings in a formal area of their garden.
We planted the plane tree years ago, and then I planted these 6 Mount Fuji cherry trees. And they worked out so well that we planted another 10 in the front paddock to lead your eye out into the landscape, to bring it into the hill, into the garden.
It certainly does that. What is it that you like so much about Mount Fuji?
Oh, it's wonderful. Spring flowers, white and fluffy, autumn colours, and it's strong, it grows well here, it's very hardy.
How do you keep those sheep, which look very bucolic and lovely, I might add, way down there at the back of the garden?
Well, there's a ha-ha, which is a concealed fence just at the bottom of the lawn here. It's excavated out and a fence down there, but you don't see it from here. Just the lawn runs straight down into the paddock.
None of them get away?
Only occasionally. We have them up on the lawn.
Now, you've been here a while now. What are your feelings on this place?
Well, we've been here for 25 years now. It's a very harsh environment, and it's been a challenge making the garden. But if we've created something softer, and I feel at peace here.
And I agree, but I didn't think it'd be as good as this.
Gardening in adversity with extraordinary results. Well, after the break, Jack has the lowdown on growing palms, and Bugman Rud gets up close and personal with the cicada. Mary and Philip Holden didn't have much space to spare around their inner city villa, but they've used it to full advantage, making this delightful scented garden walkway.
The sounds of summer. Obviously cicadas all over the place, singing their hearts out in the little shrub behind me. Now, a lot of people ask, what are these cicadas so happy about? What are they singing about? Well, have a look at these things. The males are the ones that make all the noise, and I've got a male here, and if you turn the male over, you can see that on the bottom of its belly, it's got two little drums, and inside there are two little sort of anvils, and it makes a very high-pitched noise. At the same time, they clap their wings, making an extra noise, the clapping cicada. Why do the males do that? Well, they only do that to attract the attention of a possible mate. So they're after girls again, the females. And the females like that sound. They come and mate with the males. After that, the female cicada will lay eggs into the bark of any shrub or tree, mostly in branch-sized materials. And as you can see, they've got ovipositors here on their abdomen, which they force by a backward motion into the branch. They actually cause quite a bit of damage that way. The eggs are laid right into the woody tissue, and the scar that is resulting, a very characteristic cicada scar, weakens the branches, which can break off in high winds, or when fruit grows, for instance. But what happens after that, not many people are familiar with. The eggs hatch and the nymphs drop to the ground, go straight into the ground, where they live for up to 7 years in the soil, eating roots. Well, sucking roots. And how do they do that? Their front legs are modified to massive bolt cutters, wonderfully big things, which snip roots off way down below the ground. And with their sucking tongue, their little stylet here, they suck juices out of the tree roots. Takes them 7 years. After that, of course, they all migrate to the top layers of the soil. They come out in the middle of the night, shed their skin, which they leave on the underside of the branches here, there, and everywhere, and out come these noisy male cicadas again. And females, of course.
You're with Maggie's Garden Show, and I have with me some of my favourite palms. Now, palms are becoming more and more popular, I think, for that subtropical effect they bring into a garden. They really are dramatic plants, but they needn't be difficult. Now, the first thing to consider when planting a palm is the soil. As with most plants, the condition of the soil pretty much determines how well your plant is going to do. Now, you can see the soil that I have here. Well, a bit flattering to call it soil, actually. It's clay, and it's typical of what we have here at the Auckland Regional Botanic Gardens. And it waterlogs. It is not ideal for palms. It's not ideal for a lot of plants, for that matter. So what to do? Well, the best thing to do is to raise the planting site. Bring a bit of extra topsoil in, but there is a right way and a wrong way of doing this. Now, if I was to plant, for example, into the top of the soil, into the top of this mound, any subsequent rain or irrigation is going to run away from the plant. So the best thing to do is flatten that out and make it so that the top of this raised area is either flat or slightly dished. In fact, slightly dished is better. And then, simply a matter of planting our palm. And the fact of it being dished like this means that when it does rain or when we water, the water doesn't run away from our palm. It stays in the vicinity, goes down to the roots of the palm, which of course is where we want it. Now, what I'm planting is a Nikau palm, our New Zealand native palm, and magnificent little palm. Does need shade, however, and all I'm doing to begin with is teasing out those roots, just so that that palm is going to anchor itself well in this hole I've dug. I've dug a good-sized hole, and just planting, as usual, at the same depth as the plant was, in its container, backfilling, and a little bit of firming. Get the old gummies around the plant, and finishing off with a rake, just to, once again, make sure that the area around that palm's root ball is flat, or level, or as I said before, slightly dished. And there we are. That is the completed plant. And the only other thing is when, over that first summer, if it dries out, make sure you get water onto that palm. They really suffer from drought. Now, the other thing that will determine whether you're successful with palms or not is which ones you choose. And I have here some of those that I've really found to be reliable. beginning with Washingtonia robusta. It's a very small specimen I've got here, but I'll tell you, this makes a very big palm, very handsome, very tall, but not too wide, so you can fit it into quite a small garden. Full sun, takes a lot of wind, it's a real toughie, as is the Australian cabbage palm. It's this fellow over here, and gets up to 100 feet tall, 35 metres, but it's really tough. Someone once told me you can drive a truck over the darn thing and it'll still grow. It'll take full sun, a lot of wind, and a lot of cold. It's a real tough palm. There's also Livistona chinensis, a close relative of this, but from China. Beautiful fronds, they arch downwards, really a very attractive palm, but that one's for shade. Doesn't get so big. Then behind me, I have one of my very favourite palms. This is the queen palm. Syagris romanzophiana, just as well it's called the queen palm. And that's a beautiful palm, the most popular palm in New Zealand today. Lovely trunk, beautiful, graceful, arching fronds. Full sun, not too much wind. It can get a bit shaggy looking if there's too much wind. But again, an easy and reliable palm. Couple more. This is the Chinese windmill palm, Trachycarpus fortunei. And another real toughie. Doesn't get too big, I'd say up to about 10 metres tall. Has a shaggy kind of a trunk, which is interesting, especially for the birds that make nests out of it. And it's a good container subject. It's really, really tough. And finally, the European fan palm. And this is called Chamaerops humilis, sometimes said Chamaerops. You can take your own choice. And this is another real toughie. It makes a number of trunks normally. It makes a clump and doesn't get too big. It's good for a small garden. It's good for a container. So there's a few palms that you really can't fail with. Just follow those basic rules. Get that drainage right. You won't have any problems, and what a dramatic effect in the garden.
When Fiona and Warwick Bliss bought this property in 1991, there wasn't a flower in sight. They've transformed it into a haven for relaxing summer afternoons. It's truly blissful.
Greatest ever sporting achievement.
Finally, the America's Cup was in New Zealand.
Black Magic, the Team New Zealand story, next.